Do you feel the need? The need for leads? The reality for most of us as business owners is that we rely on consistent sales for both business growth and ongoing viability. Those sales don't come from simply throwing content and offers at strangers on the internet. Instead, we need a steady flow of motivated, qualified leads. Inside the Takeoff program, we are currently preparing for Leads at Speed. This is a 2-week event to flood your inbox with those high-intent, hot leads. But if you'd like to join us, the doors to the Takeoff program are closing on the 7th of March. So make sure that you head to tashcorbin.com/takeoff and check it all out today. And if you'd like to join us for Leads at Speed, make sure that you enroll before the 7th of March. That link again is tashcorbin.com/takeoff. It's the most wonderful time of the year. Ha! No, you haven't accidentally switched over to Spotify. You're not listening to a professional singer. I fooled you. Hello and welcome to day 1 of Tashmas. Now, this is Tashmas birthday edition, so it's not the most wonderful time of the year Christmas version. It's the most wonderful time of the year for me because my birthday is coming up soon on the 12th of March. And so to celebrate every year from the 1st to the 12th, I do the 12 days of Tashmas. Now, this is birthday Tashmas, but just like Christmas Tashmas, which I do from the 1st to the 12th of December, every single day I will be doing a podcast episode that has some juicy advice for you, a juicy little nugget of strategy or mindset or answering a question, and you also get a gift. So it's my birthday, but you get the presents. Now, fun fact for those of you who've only been around for a little while, I used to do the 12 days of Tashmas as Facebook Lives daily on my Facebook page, and I did used to sing the 12 days of Tashmas. But fear not, in the podcast version, that is the extent of singing you will get from me. I will not be singing in future episodes of Tashmas, so please don't freak out and skip ahead 12 episodes because you're afraid of getting that kind of voice in your ears again. Despite my joke about fooling you to believe that I was a professional singer, I don't have tickets on myself quite that high, and I am aware of the limitations of my voice. But I am very excited and in a sing-songy mood because it is my birthday soon, and I am so excited for the upcoming 12 days of Tashmas that we have ahead. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's dive into day 1 of Tashmas. And in today's episode, I am sharing some hot tips for collaborations and joint ventures. And this is definitely something that I see as being an important part of our business strategy as we move forward in this age of AI, more saturation in the market, and people really not knowing who to trust or what content is real and what video content is actually a human versus what is computer generated. And so I am seeing this real lean back into human to human business strategy, and often being able to connect with new people through your existing network is a way to develop that human to human trust and know that someone recommends you, someone has put you in the spotlight, or, we have some kind of connection through a mutual connection. And so I do think that joint ventures and collaborations will become particularly prevalent in the coming years. So I thought this was a good time for us to dive into some hot tips for collaborations and joint ventures. And in today's episode, I do have a juicy little gift for you that will help you if you want to dive into tapping into that network and building out your network through something that's very relational and very strong in relationship building. So make sure that you come and check out the show notes of today's episode at tashcorbin.com/462, because yes, this is day one of Tashmas, but it's episode number 462 of the Heart Centered Business Podcast. So let's dive in and talk collaborations and joint ventures. Hello, I'm Tash Corbin, a business strategist and mentor based on the Sunshine Coast in Australia. The mission of this podcast is to help heart-centered entrepreneurs to make more money, and in doing so, change the world for the better. This podcast was recorded on the lands of the Gubbi Gubbi and Jinnaburra people. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Straight out of the gate, I do want to say that sharing resources, particularly audiences, time, energy, capacity, knowledge, it can absolutely be a win-win for all parties involved, especially as business owners. If I can put you in front of my audience and you can put me in front of yours, you know, if there is a fairly even benefit to the two of us, you know, it can really be a win-win situation to collaborate on things and to do stuff together. But I really also want to ensure that you dive into these things with your eyes open, informed about what the benefits and risks are, and also be really clear on why, what, who, and in particular, how. So I really want to dive into some tips and strategies here to unpack the joint venture and collaboration opportunities that may come your way and how to discern whether it's actually a win-win and how to discern which ones you actually participate in. Because if you say yes to one, there's an opportunity cost involved, right? It's often you're saying no to 150 other things that you don't know are there yet or that you haven't considered just yet. So I really want us to do this in an informed and strategic and discerning way so as to ensure that you are looking after yourself and that you are able to really make the most of those collaborations as well. So the first thing I want to say is that if you are planning on doing some kind of collaboration, I'm just going to call it a collaboration for the rest of the episode, that joint ventures in particular generally have there's a legal kind of arm to it, and you're actually going into business together or you're creating a product together, and that can often have more risks involved. I'll say collaboration unless I explicitly mean joint venture, just so that I don't have to say joint ventures and collaborations over and over again. But I want you to be very explicit about the reciprocal arrangement. If you are going to collaborate with someone and you are wanting something in return, be explicit about that. Do not make any assumptions. So I have been interviewed for podcasts before, and that podcast never got released. And when I followed up with the person, they have said, oh, well, I thought you would invite me onto your podcast, and when you didn't, I thought, well, that's not really fair, so I'm not going to publish the episode. Now, if I had known that at the time, I could have made an informed choice about whether to give my time and energy to being on that podcast for it to not be published. And I could have saved us both some time if I didn't want to have that person on my podcast. So be very explicit. Now, that's one very loosey-goosey collaboration example, but there are lots and lots of times where I am asked to give advice on collaborations and joint ventures gone wrong. And in a lot of cases, the number one problem is a lack of communication and being explicit about what was expected. I've been invited to speak at conferences before and then been reprimanded when I didn't promote that conference as part of being a speaker. And yet I wasn't told that was an expectation, and it certainly wasn't in my speaker contract. Because I have a large audience, I charge extra if I need to promote something. And so this is something that I think, as someone who's been on the invitee side of joint ventures and collaborations a lot, it's a little bugbear of mine that I feel like I've asked all the questions that I need to ask, and then there's something that hasn't been explicitly stated, and I didn't even think to ask about it. So I want you to be very, very explicit. Be unafraid. If you're going to collaborate with someone, you shouldn't be afraid of asking them to hold up their end of the bargain. If you're going to collaborate with someone and you expect that there's some reciprocity, you shouldn't be afraid to ask for that reciprocity. If you're afraid to ask for it, then it can't be an expectation. You can hope that there's reciprocity, but not be attached to it. But if that reciprocity doesn't come, you cannot resent or reprimand the person for not reciprocating when you didn't make that explicitly clear. So whenever anyone comes to me, I often get hired for collaboration and joint venture arrangement negotiations and strategizing. And I like to be involved as early in the process as I can, because I think a lot of people don't think through all of the details of those things. But that's often something that I'm hired to do. And so something that I do as part of that service is I ask all of the questions, and I make sure everyone has every card out on the table so that nothing is done based on assumption or, unspoken belief about what's going to be the benefit in return. I had someone who wanted to do a joint program with me, creating a course together, and I openly asked the person, is the reason why you want me to collaborate on creating this with you because of my existing audience and wanting to promote that to my existing audience? And the person was like, well, yeah, that's definitely a big benefit of collaborating with you. But there's also a big benefit to me that you're bringing XYZ in terms of your expertise to the program. And I think that my expertise in this area is really complementary to that. And I said, well, that's great. Totally happy with that. But what are you bringing to the table in terms of sales and marketing then? Because if this is only going to be sold to my audience, why would we do this as a 50-50 partnership? Why wouldn't I just, if I saw that there was a gap in what I was teaching, why wouldn't I just pay you a few $1,000s to fill that gap? And then I get all the money from the sales. If I'm doing all of the sales and marketing heavy lifting, if all of the sales are going to come from my audience, then what are you bringing to the table on that front? Now, there are actually joint ventures that I've done where the other person does no marketing. The other person doesn't get a lot of people buying in. Most of the clients for the offer come from my audience, and that's fine, but I don't do any of the behind the scenes. I don't do any of the logistics. I don't do any of the other heavy lifting for that event or for that collaboration. So that's where we really need to be explicit about what you're bringing to the table, what you're expecting, and also being very honest from the outset about the level of effort that you are willing and able to put in and that you're likely to put in, the level of audience or marketing scope that you have. I have definitely seen joint ventures work really well before, where one person has a really large audience, but the other person doesn't. But as part of the launch, they spend all the advertising money. And so they're bringing in the new cold audience and the other person is bringing in organic warm audience. I think that's a really good trade-off. So just being mindful about all the different elements and components that go into the success of this project, especially if there's money involved, and therefore how you come to the conclusion at what the cut is for each person from a financial perspective. Quick sidebar here. A lot of these lessons and tips and advice for joint ventures and collaborations come from my own experiences and the experiences of my clients. But I just want to put my cards on the table and say that some of the experience that I've had is because I've messed up, because I have gone into a collaboration and been like, yeah, I'm going to do so much. I'm going to be so responsive. I'm going to do so much promo. And then I haven't done it all and I've let the other person down. And that's because I wasn't honest with myself about what I was bringing to the table. So I just wanted to be really overt with that and like totally own that, because I don't want anyone listening to this and thinking that I'm like totally always coming from this, like I keep getting ripped off. That's not the case at all. I rarely do collaborations and joint ventures that involve money these days. I am definitely keen on doing lots of podcast interviews, and I am happy to be interviewed by especially people in my audience and clients who have like little startup fledgling podcasts. I'll happily be their first ever guest. And I love doing all of that kind of stuff. Like I love collaborating. I'm a collaborator's collaborator. A lot of the collaborating I do these days is mostly the free stuff though, because I find that when money gets involved, it can be a little trickier and things can be a little bit more fraught. But then also, I just also know, especially these days, I am better off spending my time focused on my own business and focused on what I can do and focused on what I'm delivering and my clients and my programs. And so it's just not the right stage of business for me to be in that kind of collaboration mode at the moment anyway. But yeah, just wanted to be like a little sidebar there to say, I know that I've definitely stuffed up, and I know that there are people who wish that they hadn't collaborated with me because I wasn't a good collaboration/joint venture partner. Totally own that. Okay, so back to my tips. Number 1, be explicit about the reciprocal arrangement. Don't make any assumptions. Be clear about what you bring to the table, what you're able to do, what you're likely to do, what you're likely to be able to provide, what value you're able to give, and then everything that you expect in return. Number 2, make the first move. Make the first move when it comes to joint ventures and collaborations. Don't wait to be chosen. I'm sorry, ego. I'm so sorry to your ego. But often, in order to be chosen for a collaboration, you have to make the first move. This is particularly relevant where the person you want to collaborate with or the person you want to invite onto your podcast or whatever it might be is quote unquote further ahead than you, or a little more famous than you, or has a bigger audience than you, or is more experienced than you, or they bring more to the table. Yeah. So you need to be willing to face up to the rejection, and you need to be willing to put yourself out there. If you think it would be valuable to have someone as a guest on your podcast and you'd love to be a guest on theirs, but that's not a deal breaker, just say that. Just say that. You never know what might come of it. And also, there are a lot of people who I was on their podcast as a guest, and then like a year later, I was looking for speakers for virtual conference, for example, and I remembered the conversation that we had, and it was really good. And I usually listen to someone's podcast at least a couple of episodes before I go on, so I know what the tone is and I know like kind of what their listenership are about. And so that gives me a lot of insight. And so sometimes someone being brave and like taking a punt and saying, hey, Tash, will you come onto my podcast and talk about consent-based marketing, then has resulted like a year down the track in them being selected as a speaker for virtual conference, or them being invited to be a guest on my podcast. And so you never know what might come of it. And sometimes you need to be willing to be the one to do the heavy lifting in the first instance. You need to be willing to be the one who does most of the work and gets a minuscule-ish benefit from that collaboration. But you get a reputation as being a great interviewer, or you get a little bit of audience growth from those first few interviews that you do. Or, you co-host that workshop together and you do all the logistics, you take on the financial risk of booking the venue up front, but it's totally worth it for the marketing and the audience that that other person brings into the room. Sometimes you need to be the one to take the risks for it actually to be a viable thing moving forward for the other person. So tip number 2 is actually don't wait to be chosen. Make the first move, particularly if you're looking at this as a strategy to create that fast-tracked growth of your audience, that fast-tracked sense of trust in the market, that you want to bathe in the reflected glory of the other person. Well, you might have to make the first move. Okay, now tip number 3 might be a little bit of a gut punch to some people who wish they'd heard this advice a little earlier. And I have certainly had people say that to me after things have gone sour on things when they've heard me give this advice in the past. So I just want to warn you that if you've had a joint venture or collaboration go south, or you're in the midst of one that's not feeling good for you right now, then you might be like, oof, I wish I'd heard this earlier when I give this piece of advice. And especially if you're thinking about joint ventures and collaborations and you're about to embark on one, I really want you to stop and listen and pay attention to this one. When it's the first time you've collaborated with someone, make it a one-off, short-term only affair the first go round. Even if that person is your bestie boo, best friend you've known forever, you love and adore them to bits, you would trust them with your life, they are your ride or die, I still recommend that you do a one-off first, a short-term project, something where it has a finish date in the short term. Now, the reason why I say this is that the reality of working with and collaborating with your best friend is often very different to your experience of a relationship with them that didn't involve transactions, that didn't involve money, that didn't involve them needing to consistently show up and do the work week in and week out. I know far too many people whose friendships and relationships have gone wildly off the rails, never to be repaired ever again, because they dove into a long-term ongoing collaboration or joint venture without doing a try before you buy first. So if you're thinking about inviting someone to be a guest trainer in your mentoring program or your membership, and it would be an ongoing role, have them as a guest on your podcast first. Have them as a 1-month expert first. Hire them for something short-term first and get a feel for what it's like to actually work with them and do business with them, share money with them, share resource with them, be able to communicate with them, have short-term deadlines approaching with them, thick and fast. What are they like to work with when their life is not all sunny and rosy behind the scenes? What are they like to work with and collaborate with when you haven't got the ideal amount of resources? I have clients that I've worked with before. They were a joint venture business. They had been in business together for 3 years. They absolutely loved and adored the work that they had done together, but they had the most toxic relationship I have ever witnessed in my entire life. One was so dismissive of the other in every single mentorship conversation we ever had. And the one who was the dismissive one also had a lot more money. And part of the reason that they were frustrated and talking down to their business partner so much was that their business partner didn't have personal resources to invest in growth the way that this person did. So they'd collaborated for free in an ongoing basis, and they'd started a business together. They'd started a podcast together. They'd started offering a course together. And then when it came to launching the course, one business partner wanted to put in $20,000 in advertising and the other person couldn't afford that. And that relationship soured. The moment that money got involved, it soured. And so whilst they were absolutely brilliant doing free stuff together, they should have done a short-term financial project to test what it was like to actually work together on a financial project before embarking on doing something big like that. So I just want to put that one as a word of warning. It over and over and over again. That's why I'm called in to mediate joint ventures. That's why I'm called in to help people navigate their way out of a partnership, navigate their way out of something that they've created together, and they can no longer continue doing it together, and they don't know how to divide it up. They don't know how to get out of it. So just be very, very mindful. And a short-term project is a great way to start. Do something free and short-term. Then do something free and a little longer term. Then do something that's paid and short-term. And then do something that's paid but still has a close date. And then if you want to sign up to do rest of your lives together on something that's financial, great. Absolutely brilliant. Love it. Love that for you. But test the waters first and really see what it's like to work with that person behind the scenes. Now, that brings me to tip number 4, and that is if it's going to be longer, if it's going to be financial, if it's going to be a big undertaking, like there's a complexity of what each person is bringing to the table or promising to do, have a written agreement. Have a written agreement. Get it all down in writing. If someone's not willing to sit down with you and put it all in writing before you jump in and do it, then chances are they're not going to hold up their end of the bargain, right? If they're not willing to openly communicate in the early stages at the start before you've even started doing stuff, then what are they going to be like when it comes to openly communicating their feelings as you go? So get a written agreement if it's anything that's going to be longer term, if it's anything where there are some expectations that need to be met. So even for virtual conference, I have a speaker agreement. Now, the speaker agreement is very short, sharp, and straight and to the point. We don't expect speakers to promote virtual conference in return for being a speaker. We don't expect speakers to, send an email to the mailing list or anything along those lines. What we do expect is that speakers get us their materials on time. What we do expect is that speakers let us know as quickly as possible if they're not able to come and speak, if there's anything that's going to get in the way of that. What we do expect, right? So we've got those expectations laid out really clear, but also in that agreement, I can lay out what we're going to do and what they can expect from us. And that's really reassuring for speakers to know how they're going to be supported through that process and what they get to promote in return or what they get to do in return. Because one of the things for both virtual and in-person conference is that because people are paying for their tickets to attend, there is no selling from the virtual or in-person stage. And that is explicitly clear in the speaker contract so that there's no misunderstanding. So that we don't get people's workbooks or slide decks and they've got huge promos for their memberships in there, or they've got 16 testimonials for their online course in there, disguised as success stories. So it's really important to me that we lay those things out. And so we have a written agreement. It's very short and sharp and direct and to the point. It's not a long-winded thing, but it just makes it very clear and very straightforward as to what they can expect from us and what we can expect from them. And particularly if it's going to involve money, it's going to be longer, it's going to be a big thing. Even if it doesn't involve money, but people are expected to put in hours and hours of work on each side of the arrangement, get all of that down in writing. And in writing, what happens if you want to dissolve it early? What happens if someone's not happy with the arrangement? What happens if you only sell one spot on this joint venture course? Will you go ahead with it? Because that's often where things fall over, is that one person's happy to go ahead with 3 clients and the other person's like, no, I was expecting 50. So make sure that you've got that in writing and have a written agreement for anything that is either financial or longer term, or there's a bigger expectation than just show up and do a podcast recording. And that directly relates to tip number 5 as well, which is if you are in a collaboration or joint venture and things are going off the rails for you, or you're starting to feel like there is some unevenness or you have some concerns, voice your concerns early and kindly and pay attention to how they are received. Pay attention. And this is why I recommend you do short-term things first. This is why I recommend you do free things first. Because how someone responds to a concern being raised is really different from person to person and a big indicator of how they deal with challenges and complexity and when things don't go to plan. Pay attention to how you feel about raising that concern. Pay attention to your mindset around why you shouldn't raise a concern, or, oh, I should just suck it up because, or, oh, I won't say anything because. Really pay attention to that, because that's huge insight for you about how you behave in joint ventures and collaborations as well. And then pay attention to how the person responds. Pay attention to how you are met when you raise a concern. Pay attention to if you raise it with kindness and you raise it with clarity, is it met with kindness and clarity? Or do you get gaslit? Are you invalidated, right? Pay attention to these things because they are a huge indicator of how it's going to be in the future. It's like dating. You're looking for some of those red flags. You're looking for some of those yellow flags. You're looking for some of those warning signs that longer term, this might not be a great fit. I also want to say, and this is probably like telling you how to breathe, because for most people listening to this podcast, this is something you would already naturally do. But I also think it's important that you learn how to express those concerns in a way that is constructive and in a way that doesn't assume the other person knows exactly how you're feeling at all times. There are a lot of times where people will ask me for advice about, oh, my business partner is doing this and they're doing that. And like, isn't it obvious that they shouldn't do that? I'm like, well, have you actually spoken to them about it? Yes, it might be really obvious to you that that's part and parcel of what promotion involves, but it might not be obvious to them. So if that is something that is coming up for you, I think it's really critical, like the way that you raise it is like huge. It's huge. Do it kindly and don't do it through the lens of they are purposefully sabotaging or they are always like this or, they should have known not to do that, or that like they've made a mistake and you are therefore in a superior position to them. Every collaboration is a peer-to-peer collaboration. There's no superior being in that collaboration. And, that jostling to be the better partner is often the downfall of that partnership. Just like in relationships, right? I see it, the writing on the wall in friends' relationships and in my own dating experience as well, where if someone's constantly belittling the other person or like they gleefully bask in the joy of the other person making a mistake or pointing out the other person's mistake or the other person's flaw or making the other person feel stupid or making them feel less than because they didn't know something or they didn't do something right or their design eye isn't as good as yours or whatever it might be. Like that is the start of the end. And so be really mindful and pay attention to where your ego is trying to be prioritized over a good outcome and a good, strong partnership. Really pay attention to that because it can be the beginning of the end pretty quickly. Now, my final tip, my final piece of advice is particularly for those of you who see collaborating and partnering up and buddying up with people as a really great strategy to snowball your growth and your audience growth and, lean into that borrowed trust from having a guest on a podcast or being a speaker at something or, being part of an event or a summit or a collaborative project or something along those lines. This may eventually become a bit of a non-negotiable for businesses, especially starting out, because we are more and more competing with computer-generated, AI-generated accounts and content online, and people need to know that they can trust new faces and new content creators and new providers in their feed. So, if we thought that social marketing and social media marketing relied on, a friend of a friend or knowing that I know you because someone else follows you in the past, it is going to become even more critical as we move forward. And so I did want to talk about this as a strategy, particularly for those people who are in the early stages of their business, where these collaborations, these opportunities to be in front of different audiences and borrowed audiences will be even more critical and often are some of the only free ways to get in front of more than one person at a time. So we need to make sure that we've got a strategy and we've got an approach to doing this that feels like it's working, it's going to be sustainable for you, but also we want to be mindful that there is a big benefit to you in being able to participate in these things. So my final tip is to start small and pay attention. So you'll notice that and pay attention has come with quite a few of these tips, but in particular this one. So I want you to start small and pay attention. There are a lot of people who pitch me to be a speaker at the Heart Centre Business Conference in Noosa on stage. There are a lot of people who want to be on that stage. And I 100% appreciate that. I love that people see that stage as a space that they want to get up and speak. I love that people want to contribute to what that audience is learning. I absolutely love and adore that people have it on their vision board to speak on that stage. Absolutely. But that opportunity is once a year. It's limited to generally 9 to 11 speakers, depending on how we structure it. And I'm really sorry, but in most cases, I'm not going to put someone on that stage if that's their first ever speaking gig. It is a stage that is very well regarded. It's an event that I protect very fiercely. It is an audience that I really protect fiercely as well. And if you want to be on that stage, I think it's kind of like the exception, not the rule, to go from never speaking at anything to being on a stage like that. Now, I'm not just saying Heart Centre Business Conference stage. I mean for a lot of those bigger ticket events, a lot of those conferences, especially the in-person stuff, but also being a guest on people's podcasts, being a guest on people's virtual events, being a guest trainer inside someone's membership or someone's program. The more common pathway for someone to end up on stage at the Heart Centre Business Conference in Noosa is that I was a guest on their podcast first, then I invited them to be a guest on my podcast, then I invite them to speak at virtual conference, then I invite them to speak at in-person conference in Noosa, because in most cases, virtual conference has more speaker slots. The other more likely pathway for someone to be on stage at the Heart Centered Business Conference, both virtual and in person, is they buy a ticket and attend. And then as an attendee, they ask really great questions. They contribute to the conversation in the chat box, or, I hear people saying, oh my gosh, I sat next to that person, or is that that person's table? They are so smart. They're so cool. I love their business model. And I hear from the community that that person sounds really fascinating to them, or their business sounds fascinating, or their content is fascinating. And it's a recommendation. It's a recommendation that comes from another speaker. It's a recommendation that comes from attendees. So absolutely, keep it on your vision board to be a go-to speaker who's paid thousands of dollars to speak at in-person events and you've flown all around the world. But also take some steps to get you there. Take some mini steps to get you there. And if you don't even have a podcast to invite people onto as a guest, start a YouTube series of interviews or do some Facebook Lives where you invite people as guests. Or, if you really want to share someone with your audience, share their existing content. That's a really great way to show that you mean it when you say you want to share the person with your audience. I've had people say that they want me on their podcast before and they're a stranger to me. And so I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, why is it that you want me on your podcast? They're like, oh, I just would love to share your content with my audience. And I'll say, oh, well, what of my content have you shared before that they really liked so that I could talk about that on the podcast or we could go deeper? And they haven't shared my content with their audience yet. They've never told their audience about me. So is it really that they want to share my content with their audience, or is it that they're hoping that I will share the podcast and it will grow their audience? There is a lot to be said for walking the walk, not just talking the talk. That also goes for attending conferences, attending and listening to those podcasts that you want to be on, listening to and engaging with the content of the people that you want to collaborate with. If you want to collaborate with them, show them that you're a good collaborator by consistently engaging with their social content, by replying to their emails when they ask for insights and they ask questions, by participating in the events and the projects and all of the things that you can in a giving way and working up to the point where there is a sense of reciprocity or there is a sense of, I can see the value in this both ways. Now, the last thing I want to talk about in this is that pay attention part. So yes, start small and pay attention. And when I say pay attention, I also mean ask for feedback and pay attention to what feedback you're given. I do collect feedback from attendees for Hearts in a Business conference, and we collect feedback on who people's favorite speakers were and why, and least favorite speakers and why. And we used to do rate each speaker as well. We've done feedback in different forms over the years. And sometimes I proactively give that feedback to all of the speakers, but sometimes I forget. Or it just gets dropped off in the task list. And then it's 4 months after conference and a few people have asked for feedback. So I've given it to them, but I haven't gotten around to giving it to everyone. But if you speak as a guest speaker at someone's event or even on someone's podcast, if you participate in a summit, don't be afraid to ask for feedback. And particularly if that feedback is given, really pay attention to that feedback and be open to receiving it. Now, I'm going to get a little gossipy here without divulging any names or revealing any identities or anything along those lines. But in a previous heart-centered business conference, I had a speaker who was selected from a speaking pitch, they pitched to be a speaker at the event, and they pitched to speak on a certain topic and were quite well known amongst the audience and the community for that topic. And in between being selected to speak for that topic that they pitched for and the actual conference, that person changed the direction of their business. And so in their workbook for the conference, the workbook was all about the topic that they said they were going to speak about, but in their slides and for their actual presentation, they did not speak about the topic they were engaged to speak on. They chose to speak about something else. They also hired a photographer to take photos of them speaking from all the different angles so that they had photos of them speaking on stage and the size of the conference audience as well, because we had over 100 people in the room. And that person got a lot of negative feedback in their speaker feedback after the conference. It was not just in the feedback forms, but also direct feedback straight to me that night. Like, there were people who were quite confused by why the speaker didn't speak on that topic. There were people who were angry about feeling like they were just props in someone's photo shoot. Like, it was a very intrusive kind of photography approach that the photographer had. And so there was quite a lot of negative feedback for this person. And I was very disappointed in the speaker as well. I was very disappointed that they focused on what they could get out of being on stage, and they completely took the audience for granted and the community for granted, and they weren't very generous with that audience. I didn't just feel like I had been used as the conference organizer. I feel like my audience and community had been used as well. It was very disappointing. So after the conference, when I was collating all of the speaker feedback, before I sent this person their feedback, I actually sent them an email first and said, hey, I just wanted to give you the heads up. I'm not sure how you feel about how your presentation went at conference, but there is some negative feedback in there. And I just wanted to check first, is that something you want to receive, or would you rather just skip it? And they replied and said, I'm not really interested in the feedback. That's what there's exact words in their email. I'm not really interested in the feedback. So, and I am quite open about what I did. I screenshot that person's email with their name on the email, and I sent that to every single conference organizer that I knew. Because, event organizers, we all talk to each other, we all help each other out. And every single conference organizer that I knew got that response. And I just said to them, look, I just want to give you the heads up that I engaged this speaker for my conference. They did not deliver on the topic that they said they were going to. They had a very intrusive photographer capturing them speaking at the event. They were quite dismissive of the needs of the audience, and they took my community and audience for granted. And here is what they said when I asked if they wanted their speaker feedback. So I shared that information because I think that's very relevant information for conference organisers. I don't think any podcast listener here would do that and would behave in that way, but I just wanted to share that as a little story to let you know just how much we talk to each other. And so even if you don't ask for feedback, if you have performed poorly, or if there was something that was a bit off, or if there was something that needed to be improved, even if the organizer or the person you collaborated with doesn't tell you directly, if you don't ask, they'll probably tell other people about it. And I get asked about speakers all the time. I get asked, what will it take for me to be a speaker, right? I get pitched to be a speaker at conference. And I also get asked, oh, I see you had this speaker. How were they? How were they to deal with? And I'm honest. I'm honest about the interactions. I'm honest about the extent to which I feel the person, really put in the effort and the workload for the audience. I'm honest about the extent to which I think that person was giving and gave value and presented something that was a little out of the box and wasn't something that was just a free webinar versus rolling out the same old that people could have heard on a free webinar. And I have had people speak at my conferences where I've literally heard them roll out the same stories and the same advice on a podcast 3 weeks earlier. They were promoting a book. And I won't hire that person again. And if anyone ever asks me, what was that person like as a speaker? I'm honest about it. So just because you don't ask for the feedback doesn't mean that that person doesn't remember and doesn't have an opinion and isn't sharing that opinion. So I think it's better that you know. And I know that that can be confronting, and I know that that can feel tricky and uncomfortable. But I think if you do a podcast interview, and especially if you're early to this and you really need more podcast interviews, I would be asking for feedback. hey, thank you so much for the opportunity to be on your podcast. I'm just getting started in doing this, so I'd love to know, do you have any feedback for me? Anything you think I could have done better? Like, lay it on me. Anything and everything. I am hungry to learn. Now, if someone sent me that kind of email, that kind of message, I would put time and energy into mentoring them. I would give them advice. I wouldn't just give them feedback. I would give them mentorship and advice, because I think that speaks volumes about that person's intentions. And I would help them become a better podcast guest. I would help them become a better speaker. But it would need to be genuine like that. And they would need to say, like, I really want to do a good job. I really want to get better at this. I am open to hearing that feedback. I know that it might hurt my ego for a little minute, but I want to improve, and I lay it on me. If that person that I talked about before, had said, yeah, look, I really feel like I didn't nail it, but I'd really like to and appreciate to hear the feedback, but just keep it to the stuff that I can improve on, I would have refined that speaker feedback and I would have given it to them, and I would have really helped them through it, because I don't know what they were going through. I don't know why they chose to do that. I have some suspicions, but I don't 100% know. What I do know is that when they found out that there might have been some negative feedback, they said they weren't interested in it at all. And I think that speaks volumes about how someone values the opportunities that they have provided to them, and, what they see as in helping them to improve, and where they see that relationship and how they are to collaborate with as well. And so, if I have someone who asks me feedback, and people do ask me for feedback, and I try and give as much feedback as possible when I'm asked, when people ask me for that feedback, that to me says, gosh, if I'm ever looking for someone for something else, I know that they would listen to my input. And I know that they would really value that opportunity, right? And I'm not saying this as I have so many opportunities that people can, I'm a gatekeeper of opportunities. I'm not saying it through that lens at all. I am absolutely someone to put my audience in the spotlight and to take a punt on someone who isn't a proven speaker, and to, put someone on stage because I believe in their message and I believe in what they have to share, and I really want them to do a good job, and I know that they're not as experienced, but I just really, really think that the audience needs to hear their message, right? Absolutely I am. But I think as well that sometimes people's reluctance to hear the truth or to hear that constructive feedback costs them future opportunities, and I don't want it to cost you. So that is why I'm being very direct in this last tip about joint ventures, collaborations, biz bestie arrangements, all those sorts of things, particularly when it comes to speaking opportunities, but even collabs, right? If you participate in a summit or a bundle, asking the organizer and saying, hey, I'd love to hear from you. Do you have any feedback for me about my engagement, about what I contributed to the bundle, about how I helped with promo? Is there something I could have done better? Is there something that I missed? Even if you run a workshop together with someone and you go 50-50 on venue costs, you both equally promote it, even though you did it as peers, asking that peer for feedback speaks volumes for who you are as a collaborator. And it also allows you the opportunity to learn and to get better at it and to do a better job. And again, as I said, after tip number 1, there are things that I know I did a bad job of, and I didn't have the guts to ask for feedback. And I regret it. I wish I had. I know that there would have been some negatives in my asking for feedback, and I didn't ask because my ego was too fragile at that point in time, or I wasn't feeling resilient enough, or I got all up in my feelings about it, right? And it feels scary to admit that, and it's very vulnerable to say that, but it is the truth. And I think that my this is so hard to say. There are things that I did okay, but I didn't do awesomely in that collab space or guest space or whatever. And knowing that I didn't do awesomely, I didn't ask for feedback, and not asking for feedback is the reason why I didn't get further opportunities. It wasn't the fact that I stuffed up. It wasn't the fact that I didn't do an awesome job. I absolutely believe that if I had acknowledged it wasn't my best and then asked for feedback and asked, like, do you have any ways I could improve? Are there any things that you feel that I didn't do best? Or, were there some areas where you did think I did well? If I had just asked, I would have actually had further opportunities with that business or with that person, or had further opportunities to do future collaborations that have been even more fruitful. But I didn't have the guts to ask. I got up in my feelings. I got up in my ego, and I own it now, and it sucks, and I wish I had. But, I do say often on this podcast, I make mistakes so that you don't have to. Okay, so that brings me to the end of this podcast episode. I know it's been a chunky one for day one of Tashmas, but I really wanted to go deep on joint ventures and collaborations with you because, as I said, I see this being a big part of our future in marketing strategy and business growth. And there will be more to come from me on this particular topic. Best believe it. Yes, there will. Now, it is also day one of Tashmas, so yes, I have a juicy gift for you. And that is, if you would like to get on the networking, collaborations, growing your network train, make some new biz besties, and also up-level your marketing and messaging, I would love for you to come to Virtual Conference. The Heart-Centered Virtual Business Conference is on this month. It's the 25th and 26th of March. And Virtual Conference is not a 2-day sit and listen event. Heart-Centered Virtual Business Conference has a lot of collaboration and networking involved. We also have body breaks and all that kind of stuff. But it's not just about the way that I run Virtual Conference that makes it super juicy and valuable for you and allows you to tap into some of these opportunities. This year, Virtual Conference is themed around making over your messaging in particular and really up-leveling your messaging so that you can stand out online in this very busy, very overwhelming online world right now and tap into insights into what platforms are working best, how to stand out on certain platforms, but also how to do the deep work on your messaging that means that it really resonates with your audience online. So, because of the way that we deliver the Heart-Centered Virtual Business Conference, it's not just learning about messaging. We have workshops where you will be doing some practice of refining your messaging. But then, because of our speed networking and our spotlight sessions and the opportunities that you get to promote your business as a virtual conference attendee, you get to actually implement that messaging and test it live then and there in the conference itself. You get to test it in front of other conference attendees. You get to test it in front of my audience. You get to test it in front of the Heart-Centered Soul-Driven Entrepreneurs community. Yes, the Heart-Centered Soul-Driven Entrepreneurs community is reopening. And for the first few weeks, virtual conference attendees are going to have special privileges in that group as we celebrate reopening the doors. So, if you know that, number one, you want to tap into that networked approach to growing your audience and building collaborations and sharing your audience and getting in front of other people's audiences, if you know that there's some refinement needed to your messaging so that it really cuts through the noise and stands out and moves people closer to buying from you and helps people to understand why buying from you is their next logical step, And if you would like to meet some new biz besties and be part of one of the most collaborative experiences you've ever come across, then please, I would love for you to come to the Heart-Centered Virtual Business Conference. You are the kind of person who I would love to have in the room. You can come and join our other attendees. And because it's Tashmas, if you go to the show notes of today's episode and grab the coupon code, you will be able to grab your ticket to the Heart-Centered Virtual Business Conference at the early bird price. Now, early bird pricing closed over a month ago, but you can grab it for a very limited time up until the 12th of March at the early bird price. But you need to go and grab the coupon at tashcorbin.com/462 because this is episode number 462 of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. So that will get you a $100 discount off your ticket to the Heart-Centered Virtual Business Conference. And that's getting it back at the early bird price. So that is your gift for day one of Tashmas. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I cannot wait to see you at Virtual Conference. I cannot wait to see you shine. And I cannot wait to share day 2 of Tashmas with you tomorrow. Thank you so much. Bye for now.